For most people who knew her, Stacy Feldman seemed to be living the dream. A loving mother, devoted wife, and respected community member in Denver, Colorado, she was the kind of woman everyone admired. But on one ordinary Sunday in March 2015, that picture-perfect life would shatter forever. Because just hours after discovering a devastating secret about her husband, Stacy would be found lifeless in her own home. What looked like a tragic household accident would, over time, unravel into one of the most chilling and hard-fought murder cases Denver had ever seen. Before we dive in, just a quick note. On this channel, we upload 3 true crime and murder mystery stories every week. If you love chilling, suspense-filled cases that keep you guessing till the very end, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss one. Stacy was the youngest of 3 sisters. Bright, joyful, and the center of attention wherever she went. She grew up in a close-knit family in Indiana, the kind of child who always wanted everyone around her to be happy. Those who knew her described her as radiant, the one who could light up any room with her laughter. She adored the color pink, loved parties, and dreamed endlessly of having a family of her own. As her friends began settling down, Stacy often wondered when her turn would come. She wanted the fairy tale, a home, children, and a husband who loved her unconditionally. That wish seemed to come true when she met a man named Robert Feldman. To everyone else, he was Bob, charming, confident, and seemingly perfect for her. 14 years older than Stacy, he came across as worldly, caring, and mature, exactly what she thought she'd been missing. Their wedding in 2005 felt like a scene straight out of a romantic movie. Surrounded by family and friends, Stacy walked down the aisle wearing a tiara, believing she had finally found her happily ever after. Soon after, the couple settled into a beautiful suburban home in Denver and became parents to a daughter and a son. From the outside, the Feldmans looked like the model family. Smiling photos, community events, and busy weekends with their kids. But behind the cheerful pictures, cracks were already forming. Bob, despite his charm, struggled to hold steady work. His sales career constantly faltered, leaving the family dependent on Stacy's earnings and her ability to keep things running. What began as a happy partnership slowly turned into something darker, a marriage built on control, manipulation, and fear. Bob kept all finances and property in his own name, every credit card, every account under his control. Stacy's dream of being a stay-at-home mom vanished as bills piled up. Friends noticed that Bob's temper often showed when things didn't go his way. He would remind Stacy that if she ever tried to leave, she'd lose everything, including her children. It was a pattern that many victims of emotional abuse recognize only when it's too late. Financial control, isolation, and fear disguised as love. And for Stacy, that pattern would soon turn deadly. There was another side to Bob that few knew about, one filled with secrets, dating profiles, and double lives. Throughout their marriage, he repeatedly sought affairs online, hiding behind fake names like Robert Wolf and Mike Reed. To strangers, he portrayed himself as a divorced man looking for love, carefully crafting stories to lure women into believing he was single. By early 2015, their marriage was fragile. Friends could see the strain but didn't know just how deep it ran. Stacy was still trying to hold things together for her children, unaware that her husband's latest lie would ignite a chain of events leading to her death. That February, Bob was once again using dating apps under a false name when he met a woman named Susan McBride. Susan was intelligent, cautious, and independent. Bob told her he was divorced and raising 2 kids alone. At first, his warmth and charm worked, but something about him didn't feel right. When Susan tried to search for him online, nothing matched. No business record, no divorce filings, no trace of Robert Wolf. When she confronted him, Bob spun another story. claiming he used aliases because of a stalker and insisting his divorce was final. Against her instincts, Susan believed him and continued seeing him. On February 26, 2015, Bob visited her home. They had dinner, talked for hours, and slept together. But right after that night, his behavior abruptly shifted. He cancelled plans and grew distant. Susan, now suspicious again, began digging deeper, and what she found would become the first piece of a murder puzzle. Searching under different spellings of his name, she finally found a school website listing a Stacy Feldman as the president of a parent-teacher organization. Her heart sank. Bob wasn't divorced. He wasn't separated. He was living a lie, married with children. Now Susan had a choice: walk away quietly or warn the woman who had no idea her husband was cheating again. She decided to tell the truth. On the morning of March 1st, 2015, she sent an email to Stacy Feldman. It was calm, respectful, and honest, explaining that she had met Bob on a dating site and only just learned he was still married. Susan attached screenshots of their conversations, hoping to give Stacy the proof she deserved. Around 9 a.m., Stacy called Susan. She wasn't angry or emotional, just heartbreakingly calm. She said this wasn't the first time her husband had betrayed her. But before hanging up, she said 4 words that would later define the entire case. "I'm done with him." Those words would become the spark that prosecutors, years later, called the motive behind her murder. That morning, the Feldman home looked normal from the outside. Bob dropped their 2 kids off for religious school, telling them their mum would pick them up later for a community carnival. But when noon came, Stacy never arrived. Calls went unanswered. Messages were ignored. By the time Bob showed up to collect the children, more than an hour late, his story already had holes. He first told teachers he was coming right away, then later claimed a family friend was supposed to pick them up. Witnesses noticed he looked disheveled, sweaty, irritable, not like himself. Instead of rushing home, Bob took the children to the carnival anyway, acting as if nothing had happened. By the time he finally brought them home that afternoon, something horrific was waiting inside. Moments later, his voice echoed through a 911 call that investigators would later replay again and again.
"My wife's not breathing. Please help me,"
he shouted. But even in panic, something about his story didn't add up. When paramedics arrived at the Feldman residence, they found 44-year-old Stacy Feldman lying on the floor of her bathroom. She was wet, unresponsive, and had no pulse. Her husband, Bob, claimed he had just come home to find her collapsed in the shower. According to him, she must have fainted, slipped, and drowned. He said she'd been feeling sick that morning, nauseated and dizzy, and he assumed it was the flu. To emergency responders, the story initially made sense. There were no obvious wounds, no signs of struggle. Accidents like this, though rare, weren't impossible. But when the lead paramedic looked closer, something didn't sit right. Stacy's body wasn't positioned like someone who had simply slipped. There were faint bruises around her shoulders, a small mark on her jaw, and discoloration around her chest. Still, there was no proof of foul play. And with Bob acting distraught and cooperative, the case was treated as a tragic accident. The coroner's report was inconclusive. It listed undetermined as the cause of death, noting both possible drowning and signs of physical restraint. The medical examiner couldn't say for sure what had happened, so the case quietly stalled. Stacy had been in good health, energetic, and devoted to her kids. Her family couldn't accept it, but Bob seemed oddly calm. In fact, just days after her funeral, his behavior raised eyebrows, not grief, but something else. He began hosting gatherings, smiling, laughing, even showing off his new wardrobe. One of Stacy's friends later said it felt like watching someone celebrate freedom. Bob was already back on dating apps. Under his own name this time, he met several women, including one who later told police she found his attitude chilling. On their first date, when she asked about his late wife, he said, She died in the shower. Freak accident. The woman remembered the way he said it. Cold, detached, almost rehearsed. As time passed, Bob's lies deepened. He told different people different stories. That Stacy had heart problems, that she fell, that she overdosed on medication. Every version contradicted the last. Meanwhile, Stacy's family refused to let go. Her sister Lisa, heartbroken but determined, kept pushing authorities for answers. She wrote letters, made calls, and even hired private experts. For years, she held on to one belief: Stacy did not die by accident. And in 2017, 2 years after Stacy's death, a turning point came from a completely different direction. A local journalist investigating cold cases came across the file and noticed inconsistencies in the autopsy report. He reached out to medical experts, and their opinions reignited the case. The Denver Police Department reopened the investigation. Detectives began re-interviewing witnesses, and what they found made the accident theory crumble. When investigators reviewed the original photos of Stacy's body, they saw what earlier examiners had missed: distinct bruising patterns consistent with someone being forcibly held down. Her arms, shoulders, and chest bore signs of compression. There was also internal hemorrhaging, not typical in simple falls, but common in asphyxiation or smothering. And there was one more piece: the mark on her lip. It wasn't random. It matched a thumbprint-sized pressure mark. The medical examiner, who reevaluated the case, concluded that Stacy had likely been asphyxiated. In the shower to stage an accident, detectives now had a clear direction, but they still needed motive and opportunity. And both pointed squarely to Bob. On the morning of her death, Stacy had learned from Susan McBride, her husband's latest affair partner, that Bob had been lying again. She had confronted him. The timeline matched perfectly. The call from Susan happened around 9 a.m. By 10:30, Stacy stopped responding to messages. By noon, she missed her children's school pickup. By 3 p.m., she was dead. Bob's alibi was shaky. He claimed he left home to exercise and pick up the kids, but surveillance and witness statements didn't back him up. Investigators found that he couldn't account for nearly 2 critical hours, the exact window when Stacy likely died, and his phone. Silent, no outgoing calls, no texts, completely inactive during that time, as if deliberately turned off. The evidence was growing, but the case still lacked one crucial piece: proof beyond a reasonable doubt. There were no eyewitnesses, no video, no confession. Without that, prosecutors feared a jury might hesitate. So the case lingered again until 2018, when Bob made one final mistake. During a new relationship with another woman, his mask slipped. This woman told police that Bob often spoke about his late wife in disturbing ways. She also mentioned something that caught detectives' attention. Bob had told her he was being watched by the police, but wasn't worried, because they couldn't prove anything. That comment became the last puzzle piece. Combined with years of evidence, the motive, medical findings, timeline inconsistencies, and his chilling lack of remorse, the Denver District Attorney finally authorized an arrest warrant. On November 17, 2018, nearly 4 years after Stacy's death, police arrived at Bob Feldman's home. Calmly, he stepped outside, wearing gym clothes and holding a cup of coffee. When officers told him he was under arrest for the murder of his wife, he barely reacted. Neighbors watched as he was led away in handcuffs, the man who had fooled everyone, now facing justice. But the story didn't end there. The trial would take years to begin. Bob hired top attorneys, filed delay after delay, and even claimed Stacy's death was part of a medical episode, a sudden fainting spell that led to accidental drowning. He argued that any bruising came from his CPR attempts, not violence. The defense tried to paint Stacy as unstable, exhausted, even depressed. But none of it stuck. The evidence was too strong, the inconsistencies too glaring, and yet, despite everything, the case kept getting postponed. From 2018 to 2021, Bob sat free on bond, attending community events, living his life as if nothing had happened. For Stacy's family, it was agony. Watching the man they believed had killed their sister move on while her memory lingered in silence. But by early 2022, the delays were finally over. The trial date was set, and what happened inside that courtroom would expose Bob's true face in ways even his own lawyers couldn't hide. By the time the trial finally began in April 2022, 7 long years had passed since Stacy Feldman's mysterious death. 7 years of waiting, fighting, and refusing to accept silence. For her family, every day had been a reminder of how justice can move painfully slow. But now at last, the truth was about to face the light in front of a jury, a courtroom, and the man they believed had stolen everything from them. From the very first day, the prosecution made one thing clear. Stacy Feldman's death was no accident. It was the calculated act of a husband who refused to lose control. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, family members, and even strangers who had followed the case for years. As Bob Feldman entered wearing a dark suit and emotionless expression, the silence was almost suffocating. Prosecutors began by laying out the motive. They told the jury about the email from Susan McBride, the woman who unknowingly exposed Bob's affair the very morning Stacy died. They described how Stacy had confronted her husband, telling him she was done, ready to walk away. And for Bob, a man obsessed with control, money, and image, that was something he couldn't allow. Then came the forensic evidence. Experts explained in meticulous detail how Stacy's injuries didn't match a fall or fainting episode. They showed photos of bruises on her shoulders and chest, consistent with someone being pinned down. They described hemorrhages in her eyes, broken capillaries, and internal bruising that only happened during asphyxiation. One expert looked directly at the jury and said, "This was not an accident. This was homicide." The prosecutors then showed Bob's inconsistencies, his shifting stories, his strange calmness, his decision to attend a carnival with his kids while his wife lay dead at home. They played his 911 call where he told dispatchers that Stacy was in the shower, but later told police she was on the floor. Every version different, every word rehearsed, and then came the witnesses. Susan McBride, the woman whose truth-telling had sparked everything, took the stand. Calm but firm, she told the court how she had confronted Bob about his lies, how he'd gone silent afterward, and how she had reached out to Stacy only hours before her death. The courtroom was silent as she described that final phone call, the one where Stacy had said, "I'm done with him." It was a chilling moment. Everyone could feel the weight of those words, words that likely sealed her fate. Next, Stacy's sister Lisa spoke. Through tears, she told the jury about her sister's gentle nature, her devotion to her kids, and her endless hope that things would get better. She recalled how Bob's controlling behavior isolated Stacy from family and friends. When asked what she believed happened that day, she said quietly, "He killed her because she was finally ready to leave." For days, the jury listened to testimony after testimony. Medical examiners, digital analysts, family members, and former friends who had seen the cracks in the Feldmans' marriage. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed a horrifying picture, a man who couldn't stand to lose control, and a woman who paid the price for finally taking it back. Then, it was the defense's turn. Bob's attorneys claimed Stacy's death was a tragic accident caused by fainting, exhaustion, or possibly a medical condition. They argued that any bruising on her body came from Bob's CPR attempts and the paramedics' rescue efforts. They said prosecutors were twisting ordinary details into something sinister. But as the defense spoke, the jury's expressions didn't change. The evidence, the patterns, the motive, all told a story too consistent to ignore. Then came Bob's own decision. He chose not to testify. He sat silent, avoiding the jury's gaze, staring down at the table as witnesses described his lies, his affairs, and his manipulative behavior. Finally, after 2 weeks of testimony, both sides rested. The courtroom fell into a tense stillness as the jury left to deliberate. Hours passed. Then a murmur ran through the hallway. The jury had reached a verdict. Everyone filed back in. Stacy's family sat in the front row holding hands. Bob's expression didn't change. When the foreperson stood and read the verdict, the room froze. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Robert Feldman, guilty of first-degree murder." For a moment there was silence. Then quiet sobs filled the air. Tears of relief, of grief, of 7 years of pain finally finding a voice. Bob remained expressionless, staring straight ahead, as if he still didn't believe the walls had finally closed in. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In her final statement, Stacy's sister said, "We've waited years to hear one word, guilty, but even that word can't bring her back. All we can do now is make sure her story reminds others that control, manipulation, and silence can kill just as surely as violence." As Bob was led away, shackled and expressionless, the courtroom doors closed behind him, and for the first time in 7 years, Stacy's family walked out knowing that justice had finally been served. Today, the Feldman case stands as a haunting reminder. Evil doesn't always appear violent, and killers don't always use weapons. Sometimes they smile, they charm, and they wait, until the moment their world slips out of their control. Truth has a way of surfacing, even when it takes years to rise. The Stacy Feldman case, a story of love, betrayal, and a sister's fight for justice.